Oh man, I keep catching the cord.
Alrighty, welcome everybody. We are here with David Volansky from Pacific Pinball Museum and Mark Gibson with Fun With Pinball. Two men that have been helping all of us learn so much about electromechanical games. So thank you so much, because it's very important information, you know. So everyone pay attention. Like I said, it's going to be on YouTube, so you can watch it again later. And yeah, this is going to be Electromechanical Scoring Relays Demystified. Super exciting. So take it away, David.
All right, thanks. Yeah, so thank you, Emoto. David Volansky from the Pacific Pinball Museum. I'm a technician volunteer there, and today we'll talk about scoring circuits. But what I was hoping to get out of today. Oh, and let me make sure we talk about Mark.
I'm Mark.
Sitting here, Mark Gibson from Fun With Pinball. It's a funwithpinball.com. A lot of great content out there, and I think it's all electromechanical, right? Okay. So thinking about the objective for today, we're going to use a scoring relay, but it's really to kind of learn more about relays and what's going on with all those relays. And hopefully everyone's going to have some sort of aha moment today where you've worked on these before, or you're just getting started and you're like, oh, that's what's going on there. Through the slide deck, we'll have some simplified schematics. Might be, if you're still getting used to reading schematics, hopefully something with just a few circuits on, a simplified circuit will give you a little simpler orientation to understanding what's going on there. We also will have hands-on demo at the table. We're going to build up the circuit from scratch. We'll do like one switch at a time, and you'll see how it builds up. And then just a reminder, you guys sitting here are audience 1. People out there are audience 2. That's very important to me. I want to get a good session that people can learn from, not just today, but you guys can go back and review. Other people are going to see this for the first time. So I like an interactive session, but if we do have questions in between, let's make sure we get the microphone to you. And bear with me, if you're asking a question about something we're still going to get to, I'll hold off. If it's a little off target, we'll hold it for later. If it's helping clarify what's happening right then, or I'm sorry, did I say clarify what's happening right then, I'll certainly want to take it right then. Okay. So first, even before step 1, I wanted to just sort of highlight a relay to make sure people know what I'm talking about. If we could get the camera on the relay. A relay is just a device where you're going to apply voltage to the coil, and it's going to cause an armature to pull in, and it's going to change the state of all the switches. Some of them start open and then they close. Some of them start closed and they open. We also have make-break switches. But that's what's going on with a relay. It's just a set of switches whose state is going to change when you apply voltage to the coil. Now,
It's also a way of replicating a signal. Whenever you're firing this coil, all the circuits that are tied to these switches change somehow. So it's one thing is affecting many things.
yeah. So, and now we're actually going to start the scoring circuit without the relay. So, you're playing your game, the ball hits something on the play field, it's going to score. Well, if that just went to a score reel, and we'll build that circuit and demonstrate that, there's a lot of things you don't get. You don't get any sound. You can only score 9 points. There's no carryover. There's no second score reel. And there's no other features that we'll be talking about. But let's go ahead and take a look at just a switch interacting with a score reel. And it's a little, see if you can get it to miss. Yeah. If you guys can hear that, and I don't know that the camera would be able to see it anyway. Particularly if you've got a switch behind a rubber and the ball's just going to kind of graze it, you can get a small close of that switch, and it's not very reliable. Before we're done, we'll be adding reliability through the relay to that circuit. So looking at what we've got here, and again, a simplified schematic, this, let's see. If you bring the slide up on the screen, I can point. Otherwise, I don't know where I'm going. So this is a symbol for a transformer. So that's where our power is coming from. We've got the coil on the score reel, and we have that one switch wired up. And the convention we're going to hopefully follow here is I think we've got this power rail coming in black.
Black, yep.
And this side will be red.
Yep.
And then anything else we need to do, we'll be using green and white wires and probably not necessarily following a convention. But you'll see as we build up, that's going to continue to go. So again, you saw this. The switch closes. It fires the coil for the score reel. And something to notice about all score reels, I think this is going to be true of all score reels, when you energize it, it's going to pull in the plunger, but the reel doesn't move. It's when you de-energize it that the reel changes state. So one thing, just a tip for when you're working on a game, if you think you have a score reel stuck, if you turn the game off and the score reel goes to the next number, what's going on is it's locked in, you turn the power off and now it advances, okay, I've got some switches stuck, but that is a good thing to understand about how your score reel works.
All steppers, in fact, all steppers arm themselves when they're given power, but they don't actually activate or step forward or back. They don't move until power is relaxed. It's the spring that does the work of actually moving the stepper, including the score reel.
And the important part of that in steppers and in score reels, we'll get into it a little bit here, is the switches that are going to change state primarily when the power is released. We'll see one switch here that changes when it's energized, but most of what's happening changes when the power is dropped from a stepper or a score reel.
So that's actually what that animation was showing you in the slide there. So the circuit is active, it's live, but nothing is changing until that circuit goes black and the power is cut. That's when the reel actually changes its value. So when it's green, there's current running through that whole thing, but nothing changes on the score reel until it goes black and that switch opens up.
Okay, now we're going to introduce a relay. And in doing so, Mark is going to start to do the wiring. But at this point, we're going to add a relay just to sort of complicate things. We're not going to take advantage of the relay just yet, but we're setting the stage for being able to add in those other features I was talking about. So this is just a very simple example. I'll go ahead and put up the schematic so we can
do that. That will help me.
And that'll help him. He's even though we've worked on these so much, it's good to use the schematic and take a look. Do you want to have it in front of you, or
up there?
Good enough. All right. Yeah. So what we're going to have is, let's see if we could. Oh, the schematic is there on the screen. Let's see. Did my mouse show up?
So what's happening here is I started out with a switch driving the solenoid. Now instead I'm going to make the switch fire the relay. Okay.
So yeah, the switch will now fire the relay. The relay.
So let's check that. Make
Okay.
sure that still works. So now my relay is firing instead of this. And the light bulb here is just showing me that the coil is active. It's telling me that I'm getting power. That's a debugging tool. Okay.
That's not in your game.
All right, so now I've got the relay responding to the switch, and now we're going to tie the score reel back so it's fired by the relay. Correct?
Yep.
Is that the next one? All right.
So again, the same switch that we were using to fire the reel is now going to fire the relay. A switch that's normally open on the relay will close and fire the reel when we fire that relay. So stepping through what's going to happen, again, the relay now has a switch going to the reel instead of directly. And again, no added features here. We're just setting the stage for doing more with that relay. But recognize, you've got these scoring relays in the head of your game. There's probably 3 of them for, say, 1 point, 10 point, and 100 points, or 10. I'm probably going to keep referring to 10 because I'm just used to that the 1 is a dummy. So 10 point, 100 point, and 1,000 point. And so now we can go take a look at that, and it's working. You just...
So the target now, the switch behind the target is firing my relay, and this normally open switch on the relay is actually firing my score reel. And again, the score reel doesn't advance until everything relaxes, right?
And looking at the animated circuit, really, again, there's not that much going on. We're ready to add more. Okay. First thing we'll add is some sound. So we're going to take another one of the switches on the relay. We're going to connect it to a chime bar. So we've got our chime bar here. And again, we'll run the black wire from the source to one of the lugs.
Yep, one of the lugs.
And then we'll use one of the switches on the relay to get over there. So if you are working on your game and the score reels are working great, but the chime isn't going, you can look at that relay. There is a switch on that relay that's just there to complete the power circuit to the chime. And again, this is a simple example, and we're only looking at like a one-player game. When you get to a multiplayer game, the chime actually remains pretty simple, even in a multiplayer game. So looking at the circuit, we've added another line here where, let's see, where's my cursor? Can we get the slide up on the screen? If we can get the slide on the screen, I can point to what I'm talking about. So again, we hit the 1 point thing. So what we added here is this additional line. So now we've taken another chime on the point relay. We've taken another switch on the point relay, and we've just tied it to the chime solenoid. And we could hear Mark. All right? Everyone up? Making sense so far? Okay. Now, let's try and demonstrate something about unreliability.
All right.
So hitting that switch, and again, it depends on the switch adjustments now. We may get a chime and not a score reel going. Look at that. Now, if you give it a good solid hit, it's doing both. But if you just get like a light hit, you could be and we could have the score reel going and not the chime. It's a problem we face. So to add reliability to this circuit.
Well, let me interrupt for a moment.
Sure.
The reason could be a couple of reasons why we're getting one but not the other, right? It could be there's more spring tension on one coil or the other, or one coil might be more responsive, or maybe one of these switches is opening or closing before the others, right? So there's all sorts of variability in here that would introduce all sorts of interesting problems to your game in this unreliable configuration. We're trying to drive home the fact that this isn't good enough yet. This is not what your games do.
Okay. So a lock-in circuit, and this is we'll have another example later where there's more time involved, but a lock-in circuit it makes your relay stay on for a period of time until some other circuit opens. Well, I'm not sure I'm going to say that just right. Let's see. With a lock-in switch on your relay, the relay will turn on and stay on until some other switch that you've designed in is going to open. So in a scoring sequence, it's something that happens very fast, but does provide the reliability. A similar sort of thing is used in a pop bumper. If you get a light hit on a pop bumper and you don't have a lock-in circuit, you might just get a light pulse out of that pop bumper. If the lock-in circuit is working right, you always get a good strong kick. So this is an example of a lock-in circuit to kind of show you how that works. Now, are you building a separate?
I've built
Okay.
the manual switch here, so let's
Okay.
go through that.
So if we
schematic.
look at what's happening here, we have the,
Here we go, yep.
where's my mouse? Okay. So we're going to have this activate switch, which we could think of as like a scoring switch that's going to turn on the relay. Once it's on, the locking switch of the relay, along with something that's normally closed, so we have a normally closed switch here that we're using, is going to hold this relay on until this opens, right? So we're going to activate, which is going to turn the relay on and close this switch, and it will just stay on. So we have a little animation here. We activate.
Well, you do it manually.
Oh, is it a step through?
So when you
Okay.
first activate that first target, right?
Yeah.
That closes the switch on the top path. But now I have both paths very briefly contributing to that coil to keep it on. But the switch behind the target, the activate target, is going to open up instantly. But that second path will persist. So I can stretch out that pulse now as long as I need to accomplish something. Whatever homework I have to do, I can keep remembering that, I still have work to do, and only let go of that when I've done everything that needs to be done.
And then, that's the holding.
So now we've let go of the initial target that says, I owe you 50 points, right? But the relay, for example, is now remembering I still owe him 50 points. And I can hold that relay active, or extra ball, or some other feature, right? I can hold that relay active until I finish the work and I can release the coil. So yeah, when you activate the target on the bottom right, that's what breaks that second path and lets the relay finally relax.
And so now let's look at it in the build here.
Oops. Is that supposed to happen?
Oops. Let's see what we got.
So we're going to talk a little bit about troubleshooting. Let me back that out and get back to where I was. Right. And I want a normally... I didn't put the lock-in switch in here, did I? So I'm using a normally open switch on my relay that will close when it activates. And that strings along to a normally closed switch that's somewhere else in the game that we don't know. That will give us our end condition, right? So now I can activate this thing, and it stays active until I do 1 1000, 2 1000. I'm done doing whatever I need to do, and I can let it go. So that allows me to keep that thing indefinitely. Right now, it's actually warming up my coils because they're active, right? So it's typically, most relays, 50 points or a pop bumper or something is going to be, from a fraction of a second to a bigger fraction of a second.
So this is sort of the slow motion version
Yes.
Of a scoring relay. He can turn it on and turn it off manually. Okay,
Okay.
so I saw a question came up. Let's get a microphone here. Yeah. Hold on. Let's turn it up. All right.
In a real game circuit, is normally the release like one of the switches that...
Oh, that's the next step. We're going to actually tie it into the circuit. Yeah. This was just to give you sort of the slow motion. We can, actually, since it's actually live, if you tried to have that unreliable
Oh, right.
switch, you know, oh, okay, so we can still, now we're looking at sort of switch adjustments to make sure the lock-in switch is the one that's going to close first. But in most cases, it's probably going to be more reliable at this point. Adjusting the switches so that the lock-in switch closes first is a little finicky, depending on how much space you've got. Mark, I've got an adjuster if you want to try and, or you want to, I think are we good enough? I think we're good enough.
Magic tool.
Okay, so now let's go ahead and instead of using the manual normally closed switch, that's just going to move over to a switch that's on your score reel. Let's see, he's got it. Is that one?
So every score reel has except for this one, has...
No, the highest denomination that wouldn't have
Right.
it, so.
Every score reel, except for the highest denomination, has at the back end of the plunger, an end of stroke switch that opens up. So when the plunger pulls all the way in, it opens that switch. That's the way it's telling the rest of the game, I've done all the work here I need to do, don't wait for me anymore, don't send me any more power. So that's what that end of stroke switch is going to do. It's going to become this switch that I've been doing manually. So, manually, I have to come through and press it, but now I'm going to move this over to the score reel and let the score reel do that for me. And it will seem like it's happening instantly because it happens so quickly, but it's actually extending the time that relay is active to the time that it takes to pull that plunger all the way back. And once I'm all the way back, that's all the work I need to do. I can let it go. So I'll just take this switch out of my circuit, and I will use the end of stroke switch. So I brought all my switches out to the back of this where I can just clip in without having to find them and label them. So I can grab my end of stroke switch, which is normally closed. And now it's staying on a short period longer than it would have because it's waiting for that plunger to signal back, I've gotten home, you can let go.
Why does the last one not happen?
So the highest digit, there's typically 3 or 4 score reels. The highest digit, there's usually not a target that will give you the 10,000 or whatever the highest digit is, and so it's borrowing a pulse from the neighbor as it carries over the 9. It's a subtly different circuit. It's an economy that they decided, we'll just share that pulse instead of giving you your own relay.
Yeah, we're actually going to build a carryover circuit that, when we get to the carryover circuit, we'll talk about the difference between the highest denomination and the others. So now we've got a switch activating a relay that then advances the score reel, does the chime, and has lock-in, setting the stage for us to continue. Now, one last thing to know about lock-in, I guess we're going to cover a few slides here. We're doing sort of a one-player sort of game. If you're working on a multiplayer game, the way the lock-in circuit works is there's actually that end of stroke switch on each of the 10-point score reels, or sometimes the schematic will call them drum units. So that's the DU, by the way, drum unit. Each of them has an end of stroke switch. Only one of them is going to open for the current player. And by opening one of those, you can drop out the lock-in circuit. The cautionary tale is, if your lock-in circuit isn't working, it could be any of the score reels not having a good, tight, or have a broken wire. A lot of times you'll find these switches might be, like half of the switch is gone. It broke off years ago. No one was trying to solve that problem. So if you're not getting lock-in on a multiplayer game, don't just look at the one player that you've noticed it on. It could be any of the players that have that switch not working.
Let me throw in something here that just occurred to me. So This example is a bit contrived to sort of to walk you through how the end of stroke is used to stretch out that pulse a little bit. And a broken lock and switch is not the end of the world. Most of the time you will get the right score. You might miss one periodically, but your game won't burn up. However, this very same circuit is used by a pop bumper, right? And there's a relay somewhere that sends power into that pop bumper coil. So the switch under the skirt is the one that fires the relay, and the end of stroke switch is the one that says, you can let go, stop sending me power. Well, if your end of stroke switch never closes because it's not adjusted properly, what happens? You hit the skirt, the relay fires, the coil starts to pull down because it's getting power from the relay, and that end of stroke never opens up. Suddenly you're 1/1000, 2/1000, I'm overheating, 3/1000, 4/1000, I'm smoking, right? In 15 or 20 or 30 seconds, you'll have a situation, right? So depending on the circuit, the end of stroke switch can be critical. This is just for demonstration, but don't ignore all of your end of stroke switches.
Right. And just thinking about pop bumpers, maybe next year we'll do a pop bumper version of this talk. There are a lot of times where, probably for economies, you'll have a relay that fires 2 pop bumpers. So if you hit either pop bumper, they both pop. I don't know why they designed it this way, but both end of stroke switches have to open to make the circuit drop. If a wire is broken to one of those coils, the relay turns on, one of your pop bumpers fires, stays fired, and if you haven't caught that problem is happening, you'll burn up that coil, you'll blow a fuse, and then you'll have a game to fix. So those end of stroke switches on pop bumpers are important in that, especially if you've got a relay that's firing 2 of them and one of them isn't going, you're going to have a problem. Now, the first comment on this slide, determining if your score relay lock-in is a sensitive touch, and maybe afterwards I can bring people to a game and we can try it. People at home, I'm sorry, I can't help you. Just kind of do this. If it's working, if you activate the relay by hand and don't do like a hard push, just kind of push it a little bit, you'll feel the armature pull away from your finger as the switch actually pulls it to all the way on. So, I already did this at the show. I had a game and it wasn't doing something reliably. I can't remember what game it was already. But I was back there and it wasn't locking in until I adjusted some of the lock-in switches. It was a multiplayer game and it wasn't like the current player situation. But I was able to get it to finally start locking in. It's a really light touch. But Mark, you're feeling it. You can.
I can feel it, and you're welcome to try it when we're done. Come up and give it a try. We'll have you sign a waiver, and then you can come and play.
So, and now we've got the example where we've seen. Again, you can't always demonstrate the unreliable nature, but now, a glancing blow of that switch should always chime, always score. Like it's not going to do one and not the other, and it shouldn't be out of whack like that. Mm-hmm. And here's an animation of this going. We've seen it already down here.
It's just adding in the lock-in circuit to what we've seen. Yeah.
All right, now we're going to add carryover. Again, I said one of the reasons you want to have a relay and not just a switch tied to your score reel is you want to be able to do more than 9 points, right? So now we're going to go ahead and add on to our circuit so that when you're scoring on that lower point drum, if what's showing is 9, it'll advance to 0 and the next one will also advance. And in this situation, we're wiring it up as if it were the highest denomination. So the carryover, which, I'll point to it when, let's see, we have this up here. So what we show here is actually a 10-point relay, but what we're going to wire up is just the 10-point reel, as if it were the highest denomination. Did we do 2 relays?
Do we need the second relay
I
for
don't-
50 points? or
Yeah.
no?
We're going to,
Oh, no, we need the second one for 50.
yeah,
Okay.
we need the second one
Yeah,
for
all right.
50.
Yep.
So we're wiring this up as if it were the highest denomination. So scoring relay has a switch that will close. That switch is wired up in series with the 9-point switch of our score reel. So if you guys have worked on score reels, you know when you advance from 8 to 9, and again, when you power the reel, nothing changes yet. When you depower and it advances to 9, there's a switch that will close. When you are sending your next pulse to that relay, to that score reel, there's another switch that is in series with the 9 switch, and it will make the next higher denomination advance. That can go to a higher denomination relay if it's not the highest reel. And oftentimes if it is the highest reel, it just goes straight to the reel. And in fact, that highest denomination reel also doesn't even have a 9 switch. It doesn't need to. It's not going to carry over to a reel that isn't there. So let's see. Looking at that circuit, when we energize, let's see, we put that schematic up. We'll switch to Mark in a moment. So again, we're going to close our scoring switch, which turns on the 1-point relay. Let's see, did I go too fast?
No, not. You do it, it'll step 1 frame for each
Okay.
slide.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I missed that we had, so we're displaying 0 and 8. So now we're looking at 0 and 9, and this switch has closed, and when we energize the 1-point relay, the 1-point relay switch that's over here has closed, and now it's going to be, it has energized the next reel up, and after the de-energize, now we're looking at 1 and 0. And so we went from 0, 9 to 10, and we can see that in our build.
Maybe I'll disconnect the chime.
That's sort of the basic build. I don't know if we have questions at this. Oh, we were going to talk about the carryover. I'm trying to remember. Why did we not have the switches? So, in the case of what we've built here, where the highest denomination score reel, on your game, let's say you're going to go from you have a 10, a 100, a 1,000, and then you have a 10,000 reel. But there's no 10,000 relay. There's nothing on the playfield that scores 10,000, right? So they don't bother building a relay. There's probably not, you wouldn't have to have a chime associated with 10,000 because you got the 1,000 chime going off already when so in that situation, the switch goes straight to the reel like we did, and we're not worried about the end of stroke of that reel. We already have an end of stroke keeping the circuit on from the other reel. We're not worried about a chime. It's just not necessary to have a relay for that last one. Okay, let's get a microphone for questions.
You know, in games that have like over the top or light up 100,000, when you roll over that last reel, do they just add a 9th position switch and then that locks has a lock relay, or how do they do that part?
So, did the question come through okay? Okay. It's hard to give a general answer because games do things differently. I'll think about a game I know that has 100,000 light.
Bow and arrow.
I was thinking of a Bally late, yeah. I was thinking of something like a bow and arrow or a wizard. I think that this is all the same way. Those, I believe, are interlock relays. They could have been just it'll stay on. You can rate it right. In that situation, the highest denomination relay, along with the current player's highest denomination or highest denomination reel, right, has a 9 switch. When it advances that relay, it uses a switch, just like it would for carryover, through the 9 switch, and it just turns on the 100,000 relay. The 100,000 relay has multiple switches. One is going to turn the light on, 100,000 light in the thing. The other switch, and I'd have to kind of think this through and look at a schematic, but we haven't talked about how we do award replays based on score, but something in that, you called it over the top, but the 100,000 light, something there is going to be a switch that the game can use to say, oh, by the way, this player also already has 100,000 points plus whatever is showing on the score reels. So there's a switch there that is involved in a replay score. There are other switches there, and I'm trying to think of what they would be used for. But yeah, it just uses a relay. You could think of it as a scoring, well, it's not a scoring relay because there's one per player. That's another thing is the 10-point relay on a multiplayer game, there's only one 10-point relay. And there's something else in the game that knows which player's drum unit to actually send those pulses to. While the chime pulses always go to the same chime, the carryover is managed for a multiplayer game in a couple of different ways, turns out. Sometimes there's a stepper unit, sometimes it's actually in the score reel. They have another switch in there. I don't want to get too deep into every different permutation here. Does that kind of get at that question? Yeah. There was a second question. Was it the same, or do you want to? It was the same question. Oh, excellent. The same question. All right. So I've talked about some of the additional features that we're not going to demonstrate. But when you look at a scoring relay, first of all, what are we using? We're using 3 switches. We have a lock-in switch, a chime, and a carryover. Oh, and a drum. So we have 4 switches we're using. You'll find some other ones on there. The lowest denomination relay often drives a match unit, which is a stepper of some sort. It's either randomizing what the match number is going to be at the end. Sometimes it moves features around on the play field. So there are other switches on your scoring relay, and they're going to do things like match unit. I talked about rewarding a replay. So there's a whole circuit for determining replay scores and advancing the credit unit. There is a switch on usually the higher denomination scoring relays that will close when you've, let's say, scored 1,000 points. It's going to close that switch, which is then using the wipers that are on our score reels. We don't have any wipers on the score reels we're demonstrating with because we wanted to be able to see more, plus we're not using that in the demonstration.
Is that the same as a sweeper?
Yeah, sweeper or a wiper. And I'll point it out here. If you look at a game that has 4 score reels, a single player game, you'll notice that the lowest one has a wiper disc or a wiper on it. Let's say it's the 10. The 100 doesn't have a wiper, and then the 1,000 has a wiper and the 10,000 has a wiper. Why doesn't the 100 have a wiper? So, I say this in kind of a funny way. Your game doesn't care what number is showing in the hundreds unit. For the tens unit, it cares for match. It only cares at the very end of the game what number is showing but it does it with the wiper. On the higher digits, it needs to know what number is showing for replay scores. For the 100, it just doesn't care. It needs to know if it's 0 or not for startup sequences, and we'll talk about that in a session tomorrow. And it cares if it's 9, because of how we do the carryover. But it doesn't care about anything else. So those wipers are there for replay scores and match. Let's see, some other things you'll find on a score relay. And let's see, ball index. So particularly on Bally and Williams games, and less so on Gottlieb. I don't think Gottlieb ever did this. The way it knows that the ball is actually on the playfield is by turning on something called ball index. And on most games, it's the lowest denomination or maybe the lowest 2 denominations. Sometimes it's different ones. On your schematic for ball index, it'll show you which scoring relays will turn on ball index. But that's another switch you're going to find on your score relays. And then this example with ball count, this surprised me when Mark found this, and we included it in the deck. Mark, let's see, this was from Rocket 3.
So we don't understand that circuit as well as we want to, but the point is that it's, there are going to be games that are using score relay switches in creative and obscure ways, and don't just assume it's for driving score reels, right? There's going to be doing other things in your game, so you're going to kind of have to hunt and peck if you're suspecting something's wrong. Don't, they were very clever about coming up with creative ways of doing things with switches you didn't expect.
All right. Now, to show an example still in the scoring relay realm, but to have a longer lock-in period and to kind of bring the motor in, which is going to complicate things further but help you kind of understand things, we're going to build a 50-point relay. So let's see. What happens when you've got 50 points, and I'll talk it through, then we'll look at the schematic. And Mark, are you going to build it while I'm talking?
I'm halfway there.
You're halfway built. Okay.
I want to test it. But
Okay. So talking it through. You hit a switch on the playfield that scores 50 points. What happens? A relay turns on, usually in the cabinet of your game, but I've seen it elsewhere. A relay turns on, and it's got a lock-in circuit that's going to hold it on, waiting for the 50 points to get scored. A switch on that relay is going to turn the motor on, and switches on the motor in conjunction with switches on the 50-point relay are going to send pulses to the 10-point relay. It's going to send 5 pulses, and then the lock-in circuit is going to break, the 50-point relay turns off, and we're done. And the motor will stop turning. So, looking at that in a schematic form, what I was describing, we're going to close the switch on a 50-point target and turn on the 50-point relay, which is going to stay on, waiting for something on the motor. And this says score motor 5. And if we look at score motor 5, by the way, this chart over here is a timing chart for your motor. So 5 is telling me if I have a switch in 5, that switch is going to change state toward the end of the cycle of that motor. And I can see this is a motor that's going to turn 180 degrees. We've got different switches being activated all throughout. We have pulses down here in the impulse, and we're going to use those as well in this circuit. So this switch that starts closed is going to open way at the end of the cycle of the motor. All right. While that is happening, and I know we'll have an animation of this, I'm just going to kind of slow it down here. A switch on the 50-point relay is going to turn on the motor. The motor is going to stay on until index. So it's going to stay on until it gets all the way around back to, it's going to go to 180 degrees and then stop. And while the motor is turning, this switch is going to be closing. It's the impulse switch. It's going to get 5 pulses before we get to this point where the 50-point relay drops out. So the 10-point relay is going to get fired 5 times through this line. Now let's take a look at it here. And this is animated, so I can't slow it down.
You can't slow it down.
It's showing it to you. Now,
Watch it on YouTube.
Yeah. Oh, I just caught my cord. Right.
So as this green cursor is sweeping across the screen, it's showing you as the motor turning very slowly and what circuits are activating and deactivating. And below that chart there, you can see the 10-point relay fires 5 times during this process. And below that, you can see that the 50-point relay stays active for a time that's slightly longer than it takes to let those 5 pulses through. And then at the very end, the 50-point relay lets go, and then the motor comes to a stop. And that's how, if you back up and go forward again.
Yeah, I was just gonna do that.
So our score reel starts at 0, and this is the first pulse, right? So because we have our 50-point relay on, right? And now we're coming up on the second pulse that's going to fire my 10-point relay, okay? And we'll work our way through the 3rd and 4th and 5th pulses. So after this, so this is the 4th pulse. We're going to get 4 on the score reel. We're coming up on the 5th pulse, and then shortly after that, our 50-point relay is going to let go, right about here, okay? And then the motor is going to coast back to its next home position and stop there. At 0.
Now,
yeah.
Mark, did you hook this up with the normal lock-in or the manual lock-in?
Right now, so I'm halfway home. We're going to try to do this without blowing a fuse. So what I have, I've added now a 50-point relay. At the moment, it's staying on and it's firing my motor, and I have a manual shut-off, and then my motor stops. So this is just to demonstrate. Now I've got the basic lock-in circuit working again, but now instead of firing a score reel, it's sending power into my score motor.
And let's, maybe you were going to say this, but I want to make sure people know. This is a score motor that runs slower than in your game. It's for demonstration. It was done on purpose. It's running nice and slow. And there is a switch in all those switches on your motor. There is one switch that doesn't need anything else to happen. It's the one that makes your motor go back to home from wherever it starts. It's going to end up and stop in the same place all the time.
So this is a great test if you're never sure if you have power in your game, if the fuse is any good. All motors have a home position switch, and if you're comfortable, you can actually give your motor a slight nudge, just enough to close that first switch. And now it's going to run until it finds the next home position. That's a quick and dirty way to test, do I have 24 or 50 volts or whatever.
And something I do like to teach people about score motors is you have all these switches on the score motor. There's one switch that works all by itself, and it's the one that returns the motor back to home. All those other switches only work in conjunction with something else in the game being activated. More than not, it's a relay. But you can turn that motor by hand like he just did, and nothing happens in your game. There isn't another switch in the game that's waiting for a switch on the motor to be closed. So you see that whole nest of switches there, they all are dependent, each one of them is dependent on something else. Or more likely something else is dependent on it. But there's only one switch there that actually does something all by itself, and it's return the motor back to home. So right now we've got, what?
So I've got this 50-point relay wired up just to demonstrate that it's working without biting off more than I can chew. So the next step is to leverage this 50-point relay and have it shut off at the very end of the process by the motor. And the other step is to now have the motor drive our 10-point relay, right? Sending 5 pulses to my 10-point relay. So The first step, I think, is to move this end of stroke switch that I used manually, put that on the motor, okay? So I'm just going to move this switch over to here. So if I've done this right, this relay should now stay active for one cycle through the motor sequence, and then the motor should tell it you're done. Let's see if that's working for me. Okay, so the motor cut the power, but this is typical of 50 points or extra ball, whatever. The motor is the guy that lets go of your relay, okay? And the final step, is that right? Final step?
Yeah.
Is to, we've had all along our buddy, the 10-point relay over here, right? Well, now, rather than using that target, I want to use the motor to send 5 pulses into my score reel, right? So I'm going to take this off of here, and I'm going to connect it to the switch that closes 5 times. And fingers crossed, I think it's good. Right?
Yay!
Right. It's always nerve-wracking. No, it works great. So at the end, I invite you all to come up and try this. I would not recommend moving any of the alligator clips, but by all means, press the buttons, convince yourself that you understand what's going on. We'll probably hook that back up again.
Yeah, we'll probably change this so that we've got, you can do 10 points with the 10-point switch,
Let me put
or
that back.
through the 50-point relay.
Yeah.
The way your game is wired up that way as well.
So is that it? Was there?
That is the last part of the build. We have time now for questions. If there are more questions, or we got a question here? Okay.
Holding it, thanks. David, let's just say on score reel, on the 1s or the 10s, how does it know that it's at, like, let's just say, for instance, the 5 or the 6? Like, say it's just there on ball 1 and then going into ball 2. It just knows that it's there already, and so it knows to send the next pulses that'll change it over. Like, how does it know what number it's actually on?
So I'm not sure I totally understand the question, but let me see if I can get it. So first of all, for the lowest denomination digit, which I think is what we're kind of talking about,
Yeah.
or are kind of throughout the game, until you're getting into the replay scores, the game, it doesn't matter what number is showing. Like the game operates exactly the same, irregardless of what number is showing. So, if you have a wiper on the disc, so it actually has a circuit that will identify each digit, that's only used on the lowest denomination ones for match. At the very end of the game, it wants to know what number is showing on that score reel. All throughout the game, it does not care. I can't think of a game that.
No. So during scoring and during reset, really all it cares about is, am I at 0, am I at 9, or something else, right? So 0 is used, very important for reset. 9 is used to carry over, just right, and everything else just doesn't matter. Now, it does matter if you're talking about matching or high score replay levels, but there's an extra part of the wiper board that we have not shown here that uniquely identifies the 10 digits. But all the score reels are going to have those 3 switches, apart from the last one, which doesn't carry anywhere.
And we'll talk more in the session on startup tomorrow about the switches that identify that 0 is showing. So that's part of the startup sequence. Did that kind of get at what you're?
Yeah, I think I was just that does explain some stuff. But I'm just so there's something on there at the 9 that tells the next one when to go. But there's actually something on there.
Yeah. And I invite you to come up at the end and try it, and
Okay.
you'll see the switch open and close when it gets to 9.
I see.
And it's often the one that, often the score reel hangs trying to climb that hill to 9 because it's trying to close one more switch. And if you're right there at the hairy edge where you need to clean the thing and it's got a little extra friction, sometimes 9 is more than it can do. Or maybe it takes 2 or 3 tries because there's one more switch that's trying to close it when it gets to 9.
That could happen with
with any number, it doesn't have to be 9.
Well-
Because sometimes you only get like,
Can we get a microphone
Oh,
for
sorry.
Stan? Yeah.
Demystified.
so that, it doesn't have to have, it doesn't only have to have, or happen on a 9, it could happen on any number, correct?
What can happen?
The hanging up.
Oh, if it, all right. So we're talking about a score reel that isn't advancing reliably, just
Yeah.
even manually, outside of in a game,
Right.
right? So there's a lot of points of friction in score reels. Different manufacturers also had, and different eras, there's different ways you want to service that score reel to reduce that friction. In particular, on Gottlieb's from the mid-60s on, they had a different score reel earlier, but from the mid-60s on, there's a way that they designed the closure of the 9 switch where there's a lot more friction, or the spring that drives the score reel has a lot more work to do. We said that you get a pulse and it pulls the plunger in. Well, the advancing of the score reel is just the spring that pulls it back out. And if your score reel has added friction in it because it hasn't been serviced in years, or the grease has dried up, or sometimes the spring just can't overcome the switches the same way it used to. You have to adjust these switches. The amount of effort the spring has to overcome to get to closing the 9 switch. It's without demonstrating the details. It's a lot of work to get that switch closed, and so it often is hanging up. You can see it hanging up, like the 8 is still showing and it can't quite get to 9. It has to do with the mechanics of mostly in Gottlieb score reels, getting that 9 switch closed. If we tried to get the camera in really tight, Mark, maybe we can show the 9 switch. I mean, what you've got is you've got an armature that's usually just moving sort of these 2 switches here, and to get to 9, it pushes really hard. So a switch that's already closed gets very closed as it reaches to close the 9 switch. And that really it requires more effort from that spring. And you just end up adjusting the switches, and you can always, I've always been able to overcome it. I think that's what you were getting at.
You're welcome to play with these immediately after, or there are more of these kind of things in the exhibit, in my exhibit in the second building.
Yeah, I did want to mention,
later today.
Mark is just a genius at building this stuff. I thought about what I'd want to build for a presentation like this, and when I started talking to Mark, he would show me something. He goes, "You mean like this? You mean like this?" And you had to build more after we started talking about this, but just check this stuff out. Go check out his exhibit. People that are online, look at where he's going to be with his exhibit, because he breaks out all the components of a electromechanical game, and you can see it. You can touch the buttons, make it activate, look closely at these switches, and see how things are supposed to work. And you've got some complicated stuff too with the whole games that you can play with all the components showing there. It's really great stuff.
Any other questions?
Just a comment with regard to the 9th position switch. Like you said, it has to overcome a lot of resistance, and the tension on those blades, for not just the 9th position blade, but the other 2, if it's pushing back too hard, even if you've got a well-lubricated or well-cleaned, and very little lubrication, folks. Yeah, it's the curse. But just the tension on the blades, a fine balance of, yes, I want it to push this far, and no, I don't want it to keep my cam, which raises that 9th position arm, to push it closed. I don't want it to push it back.
I should clarify. So the 9th position switch thing, that's usually the symptom, that it's harder to get into 9. That's not necessarily the cause. Right? So you're absolutely right.
Are there more questions?
That was the first time I've heard the word camming here, and that's one of my questions, I guess, after your presentation.
Oh, okay.
A couple of them.
Okay.
With the sweeper.
Yeah, could that same motor that's being used to generate the 5-pulse train be adjusted to do like a 3-pulse or 10 pulses, or would I need a different mechanical setup for that?
You would need to, you can't change the cams on these motors. You can on Williams and Bally, but there are other techniques for getting more than 5 pulses or fewer than 5 pulses.
Yeah,
for
let
sure.
me bring up that slide that had the diagram here. So there are a variety of different ways that games, let's say you needed to have a 30-point relay, right? You could do the exact same setup that we have with the 50-point relay, but have it dropping out instead of, let me find my cursor, okay. Instead of having it drop out here, as we documented, if it dropped out here, so you install a switch on the cam 3 instead of on cam 5, and that's your lock-in circuit, you're going to hit 3 pulses, and then you're going to drop out your relay. The motor's still going to finish the full cycle, but the impulse, you got picked up the first 3 impulses instead of all 5. That's one way of doing it. Games do it in a variety of different ways.
Bally games in particular will often have a cam with a 3 or a 4 or something for a given target. 3 is not a common scoring multiple across the thousands of games, but sometimes they would. This motor, the carousel motor, does not change the cams, but the horizontal motors, sometimes they do add an extra cam or 2 for a specific target feature, whatever.
If you really sort of want to study that, if you want to study this and you're familiar with schematics, take a look at the circuit for a quarter that can give you 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 games. I think they do 6 on some. It's a very complicated use of a variety of different motor switches. And in fact, I think in that situation, they actually use all 5 pulses, but counter those pulses against other motor switches that will be open if you're only supposed to get so many credits for that quarter. So it can be a complicated circuit where it's actually using the 5 pulses but blocking a bunch of them.
I have an animated circuit on my website, if you're curious, that shows 1 score motor turn and 5 different award levels, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and how you would generate all different combinations from that.
So I think for time now, we have to stop the questions. I'm here for the rest of the weekend. Mark's in his booth most of the time. We'll be here tomorrow for another presentation. And thank you for your time.